Okay, so the first thing I'll do is just introduce the panelists to you. Andy Fidler from BT, you've just heard from. We have Roy Arends from ICANN, Bert Hubert from PowerDNS, and Robert Sefr from Whalebone. For the purposes of this panel, I'm wearing a different hat, which is from DNS-OARC, which is what I dedicate most of my time to. OARC is trying to take a neutral position on DoH. I think the other thing is that it's very easy when you're talking about content filtering to get sucked into policy issues. We're not afraid of policy issues at UKNOF, but there are other bodies in the UK internet industry to discuss policy, and we'd like to try and keep this discussion as operational as possible. So I started sort of brain dumping a few possible things that the panel could talk about, and the list got pretty big pretty quickly. There's things like, what will DoH break? Is centralisation of infrastructure a good thing in principle? What happens if ISPs start working around DoH or doing so in a hacky fashion? And then, of course, we now have Mozilla announcing their use application DNS.net in their blog post this week, and also the announcement of the Encrypted DNS deployment initiative. I think another thing is that we know that content filtering is done differently in the UK from many other places, and it's very dependent on DNS. Other performance considerations, are there GDPR considerations? How's it going to impact enterprises? And then, of course, there's abuse issues, malware using DoH, IoT using DoH. And, it's like, is DOT DOA? We've only got 45 minutes, so we're not going to get through all these topics. So what I suggest is that now that I've rambled on for a bit, is that we go around each of the panel members and you say what you think your single. Well, first of all, it's helpful if you can just say a little bit about where your organization is in the DoH ecosystem, and then say what you think is the single most important topic as far as DoH is concerned from your point of view. So, Bert, do you want to go first?
Okay, so thank you very much. I'm afraid I am going to stray a bit into terms like governance sometimes, but I'll try to keep it operational. So where are we? PowerDNS is a vendor of open source software. We make PowerDNS software which does authoritative DNS, resolving DNS. We make DNS dist, and we support the whole suite of protocols. So we are very enthusiastic about DNS over TLS. We support DNS over HTTPS. We run servers for all of these things. And our software is being used by some very large internet access providers, and that's sort of our constituency where we hope to keep things working. My singular point about DNS over HTTPS is not so much the fact that there is encryption or that we are moving who can see your traffic. My single point is that we are expanding who can see your traffic. So, for example, if you are a Firefox user in the US and it's October 2019, you launch Firefox, there will be a little pop-up, and afterwards all your DNS goes to Cloudflare. And I personally find that horrifying to make that change by default. And I'll round off now. One of the things we deeply believe in is a decentralized internet, and I fear very much that browser vendors and specifically will start taking over as much of the internet as they can, and that the rest of us will only see the packets come by and will have to apply for permission to enter this new centralized internet.
Okay, so I will add our perspective as a company who is into DNS and malware, I mean anti-malware and malware prevention. So my point of view on DoH is there's a huge issue in combining the HTTPS on port 443 and using it for a completely different type of traffic. As DNS so much different from HTTP, HTTPS. I will give you an example. Malware creators really like to use a technique called domain fronting. They used global CDNs, so for example the Amazon ones, and they tunneled their traffic towards their servers, opening the TLS tunnel with the SNI domain using the Amazon domain name. But inside this very tunnel, they sent a request which with HTTP host of their own server, of their own domain, basically hiding the traffic, the destination of the traffic from all the protection mechanisms on the way. And you can do basically the same with DoH, as you are able to tunnel the traffic through the DNS resolvers. It's slow, it's not convenient, but still for the malware this works very well, and you can tunnel any traffic you want through, let's say, trusted DoH servers. If it's Cloudflare or anyone else, it could be considered a trusted server, and still you can tunnel any traffic you want and hide it from any security appliances or countermeasures on the network.
Okay. Thanks, Robert.
Thank you. First off, I need to make a small clarification. Even though I work for ICANN, ICANN does not have a position on DoH. ICANN is dealing with identifiers and not the actual architecture or the supporting infrastructure that supports domain names. So that said, I'm actually very happy that the conversation around DoH has much more matured. We had last year very hyperbolic knee-jerk reactions, going from my network, my rules, let's kill DoH, etc., whereas there's much more engagement now. And this is actually because Mozilla did what they have done, right? That they have deployed DoH in the way they did. Now, I actually believe that the Mozilla Foundation is trying to do the right thing. They just do it in the wrong way, in my humble opinion. But they're trying to do the right thing. And Cloudflare, exactly the same. They're trying to do the right thing. DoH in itself is not the problem. It is the way that is being deployed that is the issue. And yeah, frankly, I'm glad that there are so many initiatives now. EDDI, EDDI from Comcast, and efforts within the ITF to bring things like how do we deal with the end user? How do we give the end user a choice? Many people envision the idea of having 100 mobile apps on your phone. What if each are using their own DNS provider over HTTPS? That is a fundamental issue. So I'm personally very glad that this has matured so much. Thank you.
From an operator perspective, our thoughts on this are currently the majority of our customers on the fixed broadband and mobile use BT DNS servers, recursive resolvers, and very much going forward we would like to enable DoH to give them enhanced security and privacy. But as others have mentioned, we need to address across industry the unintended consequences and the issues with the current DoH deployment models.
Okay, so a range of concerns there. I think that one of the things I'd be interested in hearing the panel members' view on is Mozilla's announcement over the past few days on providing signaling via the use application DNS domain. Do you think that is sufficient, or is there more work to be done there? Who wants to go first?
I think you are specifically referring to useApplicationDNS.net. In my humble opinion, it seems like a hack.
Maybe explain what it does.
Oh, apologies. So Mozilla Firefox, the latest version, will work the following way. If it detects that there are some parenting controls on the network, then it will not devolve or evolve to DoH. And the way it does that, it will ask a query, use application DNS.net. The word separated by dashes. If that returns an address, then there is no parenting controls, and it will evolve to DoH. If that specific query returns a NX domain response, then it will not evolve to DoH. This assumes that every operator in the world has deployed this specific thing. At least it gives a mechanism for the operator to override it, but it leaves the ball at the operator. Still, the end user might not be aware of this. So the reason I think it's a hack, it would have been nice if this was discussed in a proper way, for instance, with engineers, operators, within an environment like DNS-OARC or the IETF. This is where engineering really happens, where protocol design really happens. Mozilla has not been, in my humble opinion, not been upfront. We have seen claims of them trying to do surveys, talking to the community. I have not seen that. I go to various conferences where I meet various Mozilla people, and they are quiet on the subject. So that's why I think it's a hack. If every application will eventually have their own way of detecting parenting controls, we haven't solved the issue, we just made it more complex.
Yeah, I'd like to expand on that a little bit. But first, I would like to echo what Roy said. We want encrypted DNS. It is very good to encrypt DNS. It's quite ridiculous that we have this protocol out there that's unencrypted and has been since 1987 when encryption was almost outlawed. Okay, but now we want to get encrypted DNS. So I don't think there's any disagreement on this panel that DNS encryption would be good. Yeah. Okay. Having said that, what Roy said, for example, the use application DNS.net domain. The way that was implemented is they do that query and they require an actual NX domain response. And that is actually kind of tricky to achieve from a standards compliant name server. If they had consulted the broader community, we would have said, well, actually, could you please, because this actually requires manipulating not the use application.net name, it requires manipulating the .net zone, which is DNSSEC signed. So this is needlessly tricky to achieve. If they had consulted with any of the DNS people, even in this room, we would have told them, well, can you please change it a little bit and call it use.dnsapplication.net, because then we only need to manipulate your special zone. So it does indeed appear to be rather half-baked. And that brings me my brief foray into words like governance. What has happened here is that a browser vendor has correctly decided that unencrypted DNS needs to go away, which is good. We agree with that. And then they have decided, well, service providers are not doing it, users don't care, so we made a decision for them. We decided for the user base in the US, which shows that they have a little bit of awareness that not the whole world wants this, but they decided the users in the US will by default have to send their DNS to Cloudflare. If you make changes on behalf of other people, and you say, well, they're not educated enough to reason about these changes, and we're going to make choices on their behalf, that is a public governance thing. That is where you make choices on people's behalf. And we have ways of doing that, because we frequently do that. When we say, you must wear seatbelts in your car. Maybe you don't want it, but we decided that collectively that's good for you, and a generation down the road you will agree with us. Okay. If you make this change and say, we're going to move your DNS from your service provider to this company we picked, then it should actually come with a board around that, or a decision-making procedure where you can say, well, we consulted the community, here are the notes where we consulted the community, this was our open day where everyone could voice their opinion, And instead what we see, yeah, we picked Cloudflare because they're super nice and they agree to our contractual terms. And we also picked use application DNS.net because, well, it seemed like a great idea. And that's not a good start for when you say we're going to take over the DNS of potentially 350 million people. So I will end my brief foray into the word governance here, but I would recommend that people set up some kind of user forum here or whatever, something to consult internet users.
So, did you want to say anything, Andy? No. So, I mean, Bert touched on one of the topics on my list, which is country-specific issues, and it would be quite interesting to talk about the UK country-specific issues. Except that, of course, 3 of our 4 panelists are not from the UK. One of the great things about UKNOF and the Europe that we live in is we can bring people in from other countries. Sorry, Ron, you live in the UK, but you work for a US corporation, so... But we did actually ask Nominet and ISPA to participate in this panel, and they declined, which I think is a little bit unfortunate. But I think I'll give this question to Andy first for that reason, which is if he wants to say a little bit more about the impact of DoH on some of the country-specific measures which we have in the UK, and indeed many other countries have to varying degrees as well.
I guess from a UK perspective, the main impacts are in terms of parental controls, the Internet Watch Foundation block list, and in terms of regulatory aspects, the online harm, future legislation on that, and age verification. Those are the main areas from a policy perspective. And I think it's good if, I think the direction of travel looks good, if we can detect those, if browsers and applications can detect the presence of those. But I think, as others said, there's more work to be done around the technical practicalities of how that's done and also the interaction with the policies.
So I happen to be Dutch, working for an American-based global company, living in the UK during Brexit. Hey, I said it. Sorry. I don't know how other countries, I've seen an IEEE research about what other countries do in terms of DNS injection, basically on a policy level. China does it, Arends does it, UK does it as well. There is self-governance in the UK with regards to these policies. There's actually no law in the UK. So when folks have approached me and basically said, this DoH, if I use DoH in my Firefox browser, it goes to some American company, I'm violating the law here in the UK. That's actually not the case. Luckily, the ISPs in the UK are mature enough that the government allows them to self-regulate. And that is gold. That's very good. That is very good, that a government in a country allows the industry to self-regulate. That's what I personally think is a good thing. This DoH, and I think what Bert Hubert meant to say, I don't want to put words in your mouth, is the lack of useful informed consent of the end user puts the burden on the ISP, makes their work much more complex, and BT is one of the largest internet service providers, and they have to deal with it. And we actually might not like what some ISPs around the world will do with DoH. They might actually block, not BT, but they might actually block HTTPS altogether. You might think that's a very, very rigorous application, a very rigorous thing to do, but so was overwriting the end user's DNS settings. So, yeah, be careful what you wish for. That's my take on this.
Okay, speaking for the countries in Central and Eastern Europe, there is, I don't know how this actually happened, but there is a law in many of those countries with a blacklist for the illegal gambling sites, And somehow it ended up that the ISPs are obliged to block it, and it's sufficient at the very moment to do it on the DNS level. So they are like the governments are happy if it happens on DNS level. They don't push it like to the upper applications level. But it's kind of hard to say what will happen if many of the people will circumvent this DNS level application level blocking, because it's hard to explain to the government that things like man-in-the-middle attacks, which are happening in Kazakhstan, are okay. So this is not. I can't really predict what will happen if there will be a strong push for DoH to circumvent such blacklists.
So indeed, there are in the US it's extremely rare for a domain name to get blocked. The First Amendment in the US is extremely strong. So before you get to block a domain name in the US, it has to insult Donald Trump personally, I think, and maybe not even that. So the First Amendment is like super nice, and they need it because there are so many other ways in the US to repress what you're doing. So let's say you run a gambling site in the US, and the US doesn't want that. They seize all your assets and your bank account, and your credit card stop working. That's pretty hefty materials. If here in Europe we want to stop an illegal gambling site, we cannot do that because we do not control all those credit cards, and it's very difficult for us. So in Poland, for example, and the Czech Republic and a number of other countries, the government has said we are regulating the gambling industry by making sure that those sites cannot be reached. I am sort of neutral on that. The only thing I see from that is that we have customers that operate name servers in like 12 different countries, and they have 12 files for each of these countries. Well, this is here we need to block this, here we need to block that. And there are like dozens or hundreds of entries on that list per country. And it makes me a little bit sad to see that. We got a request for a tender from Turkey where they said we need to block 500,000 domain names. And we said we dropped the phone. We're not talking to those people. So you see that what you get with DNS over HTTPS effectively is you get the jurisdiction of another country. So you sit here in the UK or in Northern Ireland, and you get the DNS policies from the US, which is super nice because they never block anything there. And that is actually when I talk to sort of regular non-DNS geeks, and I know like 4 of them. They're super happy with that. They say, I want to visit the Pirate Bay. And I think that it sucks that my government can block the Pirate Bay. And more power to me. And I want this button. And I can only agree with them, to be honest. However, from a public policy perspective again, it rather sucks if another country wades into your jurisdiction and says, well, here is our First Amendment freedom for you. But we're not exporting our own financial regulation to you, so good luck dealing with gambling now. It's your problem now, and that is sort of upsetting. And like you said, we don't know what will happen next. Will some governments now say, well, the DNS blocking no longer works, DPI all the way, and all of a sudden we have networks full of deep packet inspection stuff. And that would be even more terrible. Having said that, the DoH cat is out of the bag. It's available now. If people want it, they will get it. We will not be able to block it. The only thing left to discuss is, should it be the default? Should we ship software that out of the box says we're going to expatriate all your DNS lookups to another country, and now you get the policy of the US or the policy of Switzerland applied to you, and if you disagree with that, start a lawsuit in California. And that is the default. That is something I worry about a lot.
And I'm thinking about some of the things that you've said, and looking at the topics I assembled. It seems to me an important question here is one of user consent. It's what is the best way to implement that user consent in terms of whether they can opt in or opt out? What happens if ISPs put workarounds in which interfere with user consent? Is the best way for the user to express their consent through browser configuration or ISP configuration? And then this isn't just an academic exercise, because when you take GDPR considerations into account, then consent becomes actually quite strongly mandated. It seems to me there could be a conflict between your cloud provider, your browser provider, and your ISP in terms of realizing the consent issues. Roy, do you want to say something about that?
Yes. There are some unwritten rules when it comes to deploying software, introducing new things. We have ISC in the room, PowerDNS in the room. I used to be involved a little bit with Unbound. I used to work at an internet service provider in the Netherlands. The way you introduce things is you follow the path of least surprise. If you follow the path of least surprise, then the way to deploy DoH, I think, is more the way Google have announced. Google have this whole thick document. I think you listed the URL. It was last updated on September the 5th. They have a whole document on how they are going to deploy DoH, and it's actually the way I would do it. You have an established DNS resolver. The application can find this out. The application will now check if the standard DNS resolver is also able to do or capable of doing DoH, and if that's actually in the list of providers that already comes with the application. If that is so, the path of least surprises do DoH from that same ISP, the ISP that I chose, the ISP that my BT provider chose for me, but it's the path of least surprise. BT just announced that they are going to have a trial with DoH in 2021, if I'm not mistaken.
Proof of concept, yeah.
Proof of concept, sorry, not a trial. A proof of concept for DoH. So you see that ISPs are also following that path. They also gradually deploy. They're not throwing a bomb in the room. You gradually deploy. You follow the path of least surprise. You're letting the users get used to the availability of encrypted DNS, and you explain why it's good for you. In a sense, I've been involved in DNSSEC. Some people are still suffering the NSEC3 problems, but I've been involved with DNSSEC a little over the last couple of years. And one of the things we've never addressed is the last mile problem, is the path between the user and the ISP, or the user, the application, then the OS, and then the ISP. We've actually never addressed that. DNSSEC, or secure DNS, was never about encrypted DNS. So we've always known that there was an issue with the last mile. It's now being addressed. So in a sense, it's also a failure, maybe not a failure, an oversight of the IETF to properly deal with this. But in my humble opinion, if you deploy things like this, something big like this, you follow the path of least surprise.
So Keith asked, how should we inform people? How we should get consent? And the thing is, browsers know which service provider you are on right now. They sense that and they change their settings based on that. So Firefox, for example, will set your search engine to Google if you are in the US, but if you are in Russia, it will set it to Yandex, I think. So they sense where you are and they change their policy based on where you are. A wonderful policy would be that, hey, we detected that you are on the Verizon network, and according to the Verizon privacy policy, Verizon is going to sell all your details. Do you want to use the encrypted DNS service? I would say yes, because it's clear. They said your current name server is going to sell all your details to the highest bidder. Here is one that promises that they want. Do that one. If you are on a service provider network, for example, and it's hard, I personally find it hard to believe, but people I trust tell me this. Comcast says, we're not monetizing your DNS network. We're not monetizing, we're not selling your DNS traffic. And so in that case, the case comes, you're currently getting your DNS from Comcast. Their privacy policy says they're not selling your data. Do you want to switch to this other provider that's also not selling your data? Yeah, it's a wash. So if you honestly want to educate people about privacy and you know which service provider they're on, you're fully able to give a pop-up or a warning that says, well, this is your current privacy policy. This is the one you could get. And now you can have an educated, give educated consent to the switch. However, that is not what's happening. And we anxiously await what the Mozilla OK got it button will look like. And if you would make this interactive this way, then you would implement the principle of least surprise. And not all of a sudden, hey, why is my intranet now going the wrong way? Why is it not working for me? That is surprising.
And the first thing is, I'm not a GDPR lawyer, but I think is if a customer at the moment has their DNS data and it's been handled and processed and stored by their ISP, then if that's to be changed, then logic says that there needs to be an element of informed consent captured here for that change. But the challenge is going to be how do you explain DNS, let alone what DoH is, to the average customer? So I think there's a user experience, customer experience angle there as well.
Okay, thank you all for that. Okay, next thing I want to ask is another thing that came out this week is I'd be interested to hear the panelists' views on the encrypted DNS deployment initiative, whether you think this is a good approach and a worthwhile activity. Robert, do you want to have a go at that since you you missed out on the last question?
You mean with the Encrypted DNS initiative?
Yeah.
And okay, I don't have the details on this. So what? Can you be more specific?
Okay, sorry, I blindsided you with that. That was an announcement that was made by Comcast yesterday, the Encrypted DNS Deployment Initiative that Andy referred to briefly in his presentation. But yeah, if you're as blindsided as this boy I was, then maybe we should ask Andy to say a little bit more about it. Bert, go for it.
First, I'm going to make life difficult for Andy a bit. Let's say you are a service provider and you do not offer encrypted DNS. And then someone else comes along and say, I do offer encrypted DNS with a strong privacy policy. Then you lost as a service provider. If you provide only plain text, unencrypted, non-DNS-sec checked DNS with no modern privacy options, and a cloud provider comes along that says, I have all these modern things, and I can do DNS better than you, then it's legitimate to tell the user that. You could get a phone that gives you a pop-up that says your DNS is unencrypted, has no security validation, and has no privacy features. Do you want to use our DNS that does have all these modern features? And I think that every service provider, every network operator that says I'm not going to offer DNS, secure DNS, encrypted DNS, but I'm still going to be angry at other people taking over my DNS, they should first fix their own DNS and make it secure and encrypted. BT is working on this, and I truly appreciate the openness in the presentation there. But we need to get this going. Everyone needs to do it, and everyone needs to do it in 2019. And I think the Encrypted DNS initiative mentioned to get service providers themselves to offer DNSSEC and encrypted DNS is a very important first step, because as a network operator community, which we are here, we cannot sit there with our unencrypted and unsecured DNS and then be angry that someone else offers superior encrypted DNS and that people want to use it. So more power to EDDI. It was explained yesterday to me that apparently EDDI is an initiative of the service provider community to continue mining customer data. And that's massively unfair. If the service provider community says we're gonna provide encrypted DNS and the response is, yeah, you're only doing that so that you can continue to sell my data, that's not very encouraging. So more power to the EDDI.
Okay, my response would be for this that our customers, we not only help them with the anti-malware filtering, etc. We actually realized we help them with the DNS overall, because our customers, they are like, okay, we have some DNS resolver, and that's all. They don't actually know how it's configured, how it's working. So in these terms, we help them to get the DNSSEC validation. We help them to have the DOT. We help them to have the DoH out of the box. But what is for example, our issue? I think there is no standard to hold on to. Like, what is the properly configured DNS resolver, and if there are, for example, any levels in terms of privacy for the end customer. So there is nothing like, okay, Mozilla defines something for their cloud DoH providers. That could be considered some of a baseline, but for us, we do it what we consider best practice, meaning, okay, we want to provide the best and privacy-aware feature for the users, and we look into the traffic just for the anti-malware features, nothing else. But there is no, I don't feel there is any common sense on how to protect the privacy of the users. So I was a bit confused about the question. So we consider deploying all the DNSSEC and all the encryption by default, but we do it just because we feel like this. I actually wasn't aware about such an initiative, and that's important for me.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, sorry for jumping that one on you. I think Roy, then Andy.
I think the EDDY, the EDD Initiative, or Encrypted DNS, anyway. Eddie, great initiative. What I also hope is there's an entire industry that you touched upon a little bit, but you live off it. There's an entire industry of mostly volunteers that provide block list data, that provide lists of domains that are considered bad for you.
Or advertising.
And advertising. But I'm talking about APWG people, smart, SMART, smart people. MOC, mobile, mail and messaging, Antiabuse working group, thank you, sorry. These folks, they actually need access to DNS data. They're not particularly interested what Bert is doing with his DNS or what I'm doing with my DNS. But for them, having access to DNS traffic gives them the ability to learn what bad data is. And they can then feed that data back to internet service providers to tell them this is malware. This is bad. This is the Internet Watch Foundation uses that information as well. So it would also be good for that industry to engage with Eddie, and I think that's not currently happening. And I think those organizations need to be aware of EDDY. EDDY is currently consists of developers, ISPs, but all concentrated around DNS and DNS deployment and DNS use, not about DNS abuse. So we need to engage those organizations as well. Sorry, I'm on the policy level now, but.
So I think there's been lots of discussion in various different groups, theoretical discussions around the pros and cons of DoH. And I think it's now timely to move on to actually say, how do we do the engineering work to resolve the deployment issues? And I think it's great if Eddie can support this and accelerate that process.
Okay, thank you all for that. We've got about 10 minutes to go, so I think now is a good time to take some questions from the audience. So we've immediately got one there. And your questions can be directed at the entire panel or at any specific panel member.
Hi there, Dermot Bradley, Flexible IT. All the panelists have been talking from a service provider perspective. I'm coming from a non-service provider perspective. So first thing is I think of the service provider as being a pipe. Now, I'm somewhat conflicted about all this because, first of all, as an individual, I like this from a privacy perspective. Putting another hat on as a network admin of my own home network, I would like not to have malware, for example, using this to hide there. Other users on my network, as someone said, is my network, my rules. And I would see this as being good at the exit point. So I'd like to, again, for privacy reasons, anything leaving my network, have it encrypted, but within my network, be able to control my network. And then with another hat on as managing networks for companies, whatever industry they're in, again, I like this from an exit point perspective, up the line to be encrypted, but again, having to manage corporate policies, and again, look for abuse and so on. So I'm conflicted that I like it and I don't like it equally. And it's a more complicated state of affairs than I think for the service providers, but I don't know how to deal with this.
Andy, do you want to take that one?
No, I think that's a fair question. I would agree with you. DoH, depending on how you look at it, has good and bad qualities, and I think the challenge is trying to find a middle ground so you can meet both aspects. But I agree, it's a complex challenge.
Okay, anyone else? Okay, another question over.
Thank you. Andrew Campling, 419 Consulting. A comment and a question, just brief comment. A couple of people mentioned GDPR. I think it's fair to say some of the regulators are very clear that DNS data is personally identifiable data, so absolutely falls within GDPR. So having a non-EU-based resolver is hugely problematic for any implementation of DoH within Europe. In terms of a question, none of the panel really touched on centralisation. What are your views on having a single DNS resolver for the entire world at the moment in the case of defaulting to Cloudflare with Mozilla?
So, very briefly to answer your second part, there has been a 17-minute outage of one of the large DoH providers. It was called Cloudflare. And that caused indeed a 17-minute outage in all Firefox users on DoH. And Cloudflare has an excellent operational track record. So don't get me wrong. But the impact is a lot bigger than it would have been if there had been a distributed failure. Firstly, on GDPR, we actually looked into this with a bunch of GDPR experts to figure out what does it mean. Let's say you are taking your DNS, and there is a view that says a browser must do DNS, because otherwise it cannot function. That is one of the processing grounds of DNS, of GDPR, that says, look, I just have to do this stuff to do my stuff. If you take that reasoning, you could say the fact that my browser has decided to send my DNS somewhere else than it previously used to is still something it just has to do. And in that sense, it's not a GDPR thing. So it doesn't require consent or all these other things. It's just the browser doing its thing, which it was doing before, and now it's doing it slightly differently. This is one way of seeing it. We've also looked at the privacy policies of several DoH providers. They clearly took another vision. They said, look, we are just information processors, which is a GDPR term. That means it's not my problem. And they said, look, it's actually Firefox's problem. They are the information controller. And this may be the reason why Firefox is not doing this experiment in Europe. I don't know, but it is a gray zone where various regulators have various ideas so far.
Yeah. Regarding the GDPR processor and the administrator, that there is still an issue that you have to impose the requirement on the processor. Nevertheless, so. That could be actually the reason why they are not trying this here, because that's mind-blowing.
Okay, we have one more question from
Tom from Cloudflare. This will be fun. So I was mostly wondering that it's good that there's at least a bit more of a balanced debate happening, opposed to what happened previously, where it was clearly just like, rah, this is bad, no. The main perception that we occasionally get is that, especially from service providers' points of view, is that there's an annoyance because they're realizing that their data stream is drying up on DNS intelligence, and that's the main issue. That is happening with the fact that Mozilla is trying to actively push for greater privacy for their users through the implementation of ESNI as well as the implementation of DoH. And service providers are starting to understand that, oh, the shenanigans we've been up to over the last 20 years no longer works. Is that a main issue, or is it mostly the fact that Mozilla is actively trying to push the DoH ecosystem forward by doing these things and then allowing user choice?
So did you just state that service providers are doing DNS processing and monetizing that stuff and selling it? Is that your claim?
Not all of them, but surely some of them.
Yeah, but it would be good to substantiate that. I mean, people just say that, yeah, there's all kinds of DNS shenanigans, people are doing that. I run around, I don't see it.
Right. But the point here is that what we're trying to do is encrypt everything instead of like have it like in the 90s where there was nothing encrypted. I don't see how there's a problem there.
No, no one here also said there was a problem there. We said several times, look, encryption is good stuff, we want it. It's the sending the encrypted stuff to a suddenly different place by default with improper consent. That is the issue.
But if it remains within the ISPs network, then there's also no user consent, right? Like the current setup that BT, for example, does.
Which is why we launched an initiative to encrypt DNS. So I sort of failed to see your point here.
It still goes to BT, right? It's still BT running the encrypted DNS.
Yeah, or it could be someone else running the encrypted DNS. There's no reason why your company is a better place to send the encrypted data.
Oh, I'm not trying to imply that in any way or form. I completely agree with that.
Okay, but then what is the point? Because
the point is that you're trying to insist that user consent should be given, and I agree with that. But the point I'm also trying to make is that currently no user consent is being given regarding where, for example, BT's customers, their DNS goes to, unless they explicitly know enough about their operating system to actually set their DNS.
So the thing is, the DNS is as it was. And I agree that consent step did not historically exist, except that the customer picked their service provider on a variations of reasons. The problem is that the people are now proposing changing an existing setup. And we want consent for changing things. We do not typically want consent for keeping things the way they are, because they know already.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're out of time for questions, but what I would like to do just briefly before the coffee break is go around all the panel members one more time, and if you could just like wrap the discussion up with one quick sentence. So, Andy, you going to go first?
So I think from our perspective is we are keen to roadmap the deployment of DOT and DoH in the future, but we need to address issues around the impact around content caching, informed consent, impact on parental controls. All those aspects require further industry collaboration.
Yeah, I'm just going to use this minute to give my response to the gentleman from Cloudflare over there. I think it's fundamentally a problem that if I live in this jurisdiction, that my data can be blindly sent to another jurisdiction without my consent. My consent is that I choose with my wallet the ISP that provides me the best service. And I trust my ISP. It's actually highly illegal for an ISP in the UK or in Holland to pick up my data and sell it to the highest bidder. I understand it's different in other jurisdictions, but that's the case in the UK while they're still in the European Union and following the GDPR. So I think it's fundamentally a problem that my data gets sent elsewhere. And my consent definitely is there if I choose my ISP. Anyway, For the long term, I think EDD is really good. More talk, more people from either side of the fence talking to each other. That's actually a very good thing.
Okay, Robert, quick summary.
Okay, I'm happy about the push for the encryption, and we are all for it, and we are supporting it. Our view is to keep it decentralized if possible, and hopefully, or we will be doing our best to help all these encryption initiatives.
Well, I've been talking too much already on this manual, so I would like to thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions, you can see me during coffee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you to all our panel members and for the audience questions, and also for the setup presentations. I think you're probably all DNS'd out by this time. I hope that we'll have time to revisit this issue, in at least one of the next two UKNOFs. But I hope you join me in thanking all the panel members.